Hi guys, welcome to the recap show. Today's movie recap is going to cover a 2011 thriller movie named Straw Dogs. Sit back, get a drink, and enjoy. Straw Dogs' first scene reveals a hunter gunning down a deer and finishing it off with his two friends. Up next, David and Amy Sumner, a newlywed couple, ride their convertible into Amy's hometown Blackwater. Memories flood into Amy's head as she sights familiar places and people. Eventually, David manages to get the both of them to a diner in one piece. Upon getting there, they both settle down and have some lunch when Charlie, Amy's old flame, walks in on them. Amy introduces her husband to Charlie and the two exchange handshakes. Charlie explains to David his plans on helping them fix the roof, and David concurs with it. Minutes later, the duo get comfy with each other, but David gives Charlie and Amy some space to reminisce and probably clear any misunderstandings they previously had. Charlie sits with Amy and discusses old times with his former girlfriend. Meanwhile, David settles in with the hillbilly bartender and the angry coach. They both get into a fight over a glass of beer but are broken apart by Charlie and another dude. After the coach is sent home, Amy and David walk outside the diner to drive home. David spots Jeremy, the town's invalid, sitting in their car and smiling. He shouts at him to get out of his car. However, Amy handles things more gently and, moments later, Jeremy is off their car. David's a tad bit impressed as he lets his wife drive him home. On their way back home, David gets a little jealous after finding out Charlie and Amy used to see each other. Amy quickly stops the car and quells any brewing jealousy in her husband by doing the obvious. After joking around a little bit, Amy and her husband get to their house. With nostalgia engulfing Amy in its aura, she checks around the home with David. While they do, the movers arrive with their stuff and haul them inside. Once all the heavy lifting is done, Amy hits the supermarket to get groceries. She gets back home to find out David's already transformed her dad's study into his home office. She marvels at the creativity and sits on one of her daddy's chairs. David leaves his laptop and settles in with his wife when they get a jump scare from the family cat. The day ends on a good note for everybody. The next day, David and Amy are woken up by the loud music coming from Charlie and his boys as they work on repairing their roof. David jumps out of bed and goes to talk to the boys. He complains to Charlie that his music woke them up and urges him to come a little later next time. Charlie nods in agreement and continues his work. Later into the day, one of Charlie's boys walks into the house unannounced and imposes on David's privacy. He helps himself to a bottle of beer alongside an apple and discusses with David as he chugs down his fruit snack. He quickly stands up and sees himself out when Amy walks into David's office. Realizing they were now alone, Amy gets herself a popsicle and seduces her husband. David doesn't buy any of it as he lets his concerns known to Amy, who urges him to do something about it if he doesn't like it. David takes Amy's advice and discusses the incident with Charlie. Charlie assures him he'd warn his guides about trespassing next time and leaves the property. Before leaving, though, he invites David to go hunting with them one day. However, David politely rejects his offer and gets back to his wife. In the next scene, Charlie and his guys, who are partying in the town's pub, discuss how lucky David was to end up with Amy. Meanwhile, David and Amy enjoy their evening over a game of chess. Amy, who seems to be struggling desperately with making her next move, sulks a bit. David notices this and decides to get his wife into the mood for the night. He successfully does so, and the duo enjoy a nice time together. Elsewhere, Coach Milkins fools around as usual in the diner/pub when the atmosphere suddenly gets serious. He tells Jeremy's brother, Daniel Niles, to warn Jeremy to stay off his daughter Janice. Daniel assures the coach he'd talk to Jeremy. The next day, Charlie and the boys drive up and close to Amy, who's on her early morning run. They spectate her behind a bit and zoom past her to get to work early. Some minutes pass and they settle in to begin their work. As they do, Amy arrives back home and catches all of them looking at her sultrily. She rushes inside and expresses her concerns to David. David teases her a bit and then tells her to dress a bit more decently if she wants to command respect from the other guys. This doesn't sit well with Amy as she walks out of the room to take a bath. Amy then does the most unreasonable thing ever. She opens the window to the bathroom upstairs and removes her top for the boys working outside to see. Charlie's eyes open wide as memories of him bedding Amy flood back in. Soon they crank up the music's volume and work louder than ever, which disturbs David. After a hard day's work, David joins the boys to greet them goodbye and kickstarts his own car to get some cell reception in town. On the way, he's blocked by the guys for a little while and they allow him to overtake later on. David gladly does so as he finally goes higher than 10 miles an hour. Unfortunately for him, he nearly crashes into a timber extraction unit up front. David heaves a sigh of relief and heads towards town. Getting there, he takes his car to a mechanic and places a call to his colleague, Aaron. He complains about the lack of cell service in the area, only to have the call scrambled before even finishing it. Tired of his new situation, David sits down and watches Daniel slap his brother across the street. Apparently, he saw Jeremy with the coach's daughter again. David's a little uncomfortable seeing this, but decides not to do anything. His mechanic finishes work on his car and hands it over to him. David drives over to the diner to have some Budweiser. As usual, he meets the coach alongside Charlie and the boys. Some minutes pass and someone else enters the diner, introduces himself as the former assistant coach, and invites David to church later that Sunday. David accepts his invitation, chugs down his drink, and leaves the diner. That Sunday, David attends church with Amy but doesn't show much interest. He stays anyway and listens to the preacher talk about Christ. When he gets tired of hearing the preacher, he walks out of the church to sleep in his car. Minutes later, Charlie walks over to David's car and asks him why he left church. David says church wasn't really his thing, so he's better off without it. Charlie scoffs and teases David a bit. As they exchange words in a passive-aggressive manner, Amy walks out of church and gets back to her husband. Later during the day, David and his wife attend a party hosted by the town's football pitch. In one scene, David, Amy, Janice, and some friends get into a random discussion alongside Charlie and his boys. Jeremy joins them a little while later and is shunned off by Coach Milkins when he sees Jeremy getting close to his daughter. Jeremy doesn't get the message as he keeps calling Janice his girlfriend. Coach Milkins punches Jeremy and the fight between Milkins and Jeremy extends a few minutes until Amy breaks them apart. David pulls his wife out before she gets hit and chastises her for throwing herself into the fight so easily. Amy shrugs him off and they drive home in peace. That evening, David and Amy give each other the silent treatment. David tries doing his exercise but gets shunned by his wife. David goes over to open his wardrobe but notices something's off. He walks over to the bed and sits down. Noticing something was wrong, Amy checks out the wardrobe as well. Opening it, she finds her cat's lifeless body hanging. This freaks the duo out as they both discuss how to tighten their security. Amy brings out a gun from the floor and cocks it. David tries to treat the situation as normal, but Amy tells him to take matters into their own hands. The next day, David tries to get Charlie and his guys to confess their involvement in the cat's termination. After that day's work, they're invited to the house to help check out a bear trap that Amy's father placed in the house's fireplace. As Charlie and one of his boys check out the bear trap, Amy strolls in with some beer for the boys. After handing each one of them a beer, she pretends to call her cat to get some milk. This makes Charlie and some of his boys a bit uneasy as they quickly finish up their drink and invite David to hunt with them. David accepts their invitation this time and follows them. On their way to the hunting site, he notices Charlie absent and asks why. The boys tell him Charlie was going to join them soon, which he does. Further into their trip, they all prepare for their hunting session while Amy goes on her morning run. In the forest, Charlie separates himself from the group and strolls off somewhere else. Some minutes into the hunt, there's fog everywhere. David's alone when someone shoots at a deer next to him. He recoils in fear as one of Charlie's boys walk in to apologize for shooting too close to him. Unknown to David, Charlie's already excused himself from the group just so he could get to Amy. Charlie's plan works as he catches Amy all alone in the house. He lets himself in and violates Amy after she accuses him of eliminating her cat. Back on the hunting ground, David sees a buck and makes his first kill. At that moment, Charlie climaxes and passes Amy to another one of his friends to have his way with her. Amy's screams can be heard as Charlie sits on the chair thinking about what he'd done. After the other guy climaxes, he dresses himself up and follows Charlie out. In the next scene, David is seen walking down the road and asking for a ride after being abandoned by Charlie's men. Sheriff Burke sees him and stops him after noticing a firearm on David. Thankfully, things clear on a good note and David explains he only used it to hunt. Upon getting home, David chats with his indifferent wife who just stares at him in disgust and calls him a coward. David continues removing his shoes as Amy insults him the more. Eventually, he gets fed up and chastises his wife for pulling the milk stunt earlier that day. Amy couldn't bring herself to tell David what happened earlier. Instead, she begs her husband to leave that town together. David promises to fire Charlie and the boys the next day. The next day, David tries to fire Charlie in a cowardly way and this doesn't work. He even pays Charlie off to get out of the house. As he does so, Amy walks out dejected and stares at Charlie. Charlie greets her and walks away. That evening, Amy drives her husband to the Friday night game. They settle down and wait for the game to begin. Elsewhere on the pitch, Janice meets with Jeremy in secret and takes a walk with him. After the recitation of the national anthem, the game kicks off. Charlie shows Amy his face and this causes her to remember the horrible memory of the day before. Meanwhile, Janice takes Jeremy to the auditorium and kisses him. Coach notices that his daughter's gone and finds out from one of her friends that she talked with Jeremy before she disappeared. Coach Milkins rushes toward the auditorium to find his daughter. He screams her name out and she notices. Jeremy quickly holds Janice's mouth and accidentally terminates her. When her father's voice thins out, Jeremy releases her and finds out she's already gone. Back on the pitch, David notices Amy's restiveness and drives her back home. On their way home, they come to a screeching halt after hitting Jeremy and breaking his arm. David walks out of his car and offers first aid to Jeremy. He wraps his arm in his jacket, calls 911, and drives Jeremy back home to his house. Charlie and Coach Milken both overhear the cops talking about Jeremy's location. According to them, he was being kept in Sumner's residence until help arrived. Coach and Charlie rally up the boys and drive towards David's house. Getting there, Charlie bangs on David's door and orders them to submit Jeremy to justice. David tells Charlie he's not ready to release Jeremy, and this annoys the coach. After coming to a fruitless negotiation, the coach loses it and talks to Charlie. Charlie gives him a lunatic look, takes a hunting gun, and hands it over to Milkins. The boys outside become violent as they throw bottles at David's door. Thankfully, before things go completely out of hand, Sheriff Burke arrives and urges the boys to drop their weapons. They obey the sheriff and throw insults at him. Burke eventually steps in and tries to negotiate with Sumner. However, things don't go the sheriff's way as Milken loads his gun and shoots the sheriff. David and Amy immediately go into survival mode. David loads the gun at home and turns off all the lights. Soon, the boys start breaking into the house, hitting everything in sight. David quickly urges his wife to set the bear trap and conditions her to keep Jeremy safe upstairs while he keeps the violent men outside from entering his house. Charlie destroys David's car while David prepares traps around the house. Amidst all the hubbub, one of David's men tries to break into the house from a window. David uses a nail gun to take him out and continues setting his death traps. Using his horror movie writing experience, he heats up some oil and pours all of it on the coach's face when he tries to break in. Milkins cries out in pain as he recoils to the boys. While he does, something snaps in David as he gets calmer than before. He puts on some music and waits for Charlie and his men to break, almost as if he became James Bond. Charlie notices the change in the mood and decides to ram the house. David quickly rushes upstairs to take his wife off the window. After calming her down, he returns back down only to find out that the coach and some of the boys had already broken into the house. David hides out of sight, takes out Coach Milkins and another one of Charlie's men. He comes face to face with Charlie but doesn't fight him as he rushes upstairs after hearing his wife scream. Charlie follows him upstairs and convinces his guy to put down the gun. The guy succumbs but is taken out by Amy, who'd already picked up a gun earlier. Seeing this, Charlie hits David and pushes him down the stairs. After taking a few hits from Charlie, David lies down flat on the ground. Charlie picks up a gun and points it at his head. Before he pulls the trigger, however, Amy holds him at gunpoint. Charlie gets distracted and tries to calm Amy down. Unknown to him, David already got up and picked up the bear trap. He sets it on Charlie's head and the trap snaps, taking out Charlie in the process. When it's all over, David walks outside the house and watches it burn. The movie ends when the police siren is heard in the distance, and David stands victorious over his enemies. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to receive future recaps.